She came with a single page in her hand. On that page were just a few lines. One main question, one clear mission: to speak honestly. That was her focus. She wasn't here to play games or dance around the truth. She wanted answers. What followed, though, caught everyone off guard. On national television, in front of millions of viewers, Jimmy Kimmel lost his temper. And once it happened, the whole internet lit up. Clips were shared everywhere. People were shocked, entertained, and divided. Karoline Leavitt wasn't clueless about what she had signed up for. She knew walking onto the set of a late-night comedy show wasn't neutral ground. It was their territory, their rules, especially this show. Still, she said yes to the invitation. The message she got from the producers painted it as an opportunity, a way to bring attention to how young people were becoming more politically active. For her, that mattered. That was worth the risk. Even so, something about the email felt overly polished. It read like it had gone through too many hands, too many edits. There was a sense of control behind it that didn't sit right. She flew into Los Angeles that afternoon. A car was waiting to pick her up. The driver said very little and just played a playlist full of sarcastic comedy routines. It almost felt intentional. She looked out the window during the ride, quietly, wondering how much of the evening had already been planned before she ever said yes. When she arrived at the studio near Hollywood Boulevard, everything seemed fine on the surface. Cold water, neatly arranged fruit, young staff members offering polite smiles, but something didn't feel genuine. The smiles were there, but they weren't warm. It felt like they were already expecting the night to go a certain way, and she wasn't in on the joke. One of the show's producers, a woman named Lacey, came into the room holding a clipboard. Her tone was overly cheerful. "Thanks for coming. Jimmy's looking forward to the conversation," she said. "There might be a few light jokes, just for fun." Karoline responded with a calm smile. "I don't mind jokes." But Lacey's reaction suggested she wasn't convinced. Before leaving, she casually added, "Oh, and no phones allowed on stage." Karoline hesitated. That wasn't the norm. She had done other shows. Usually, phones were fine. But she didn't question it. She simply nodded and placed hers in her bag. Her makeup was applied quickly and quietly. The artist didn't ask any friendly questions. There was no chit-chat, just silence and powder. In the green room, the TV was playing silent clips from past episodes. Karoline watched Jimmy roast various political figures, mostly from the right. She knew what kind of environment she had entered. Still, she remembered why she was there. She had something to say. Soon, an assistant knocked and told her it was almost time. She stood up, fixed her blazer, adjusted her microphone, and walked toward the stage. The audience was laughing at something Jimmy had just said, likely a joke about her, but she didn't react. She waited behind the curtain, calm and focused. She glanced at the screen nearby and saw Jimmy, smiling, loose, fully in his element. He leaned toward the audience, flashing that usual confident grin. Then, with a playful tone, he said, "Please welcome Karoline Leavitt, a former White House aide, the youngest person ever to run for Congress as a Republican, and maybe the only one here who can tell us what young voters actually care about." The crowd responded with soft applause and a few chuckles. Karoline walked out calmly, her expression steady, posture strong. Jimmy stood up, reached out to shake her hand, and once they both sat down, he turned back to the crowd with a grin. "Karoline, thanks for joining us tonight. We had to cancel our Flat Earth segment just to make room for you, so no pressure," he joked, getting a good laugh from the audience. Without missing a beat, Karoline replied with a small smile, "Thanks for inviting me. I've heard Flat Earthers are more accepted in Hollywood anyway." The response was mixed. Some laughter, a few uneasy coughs, but she wasn't trying to entertain. She was there with a purpose. Even if nobody else knew what was coming, she did. Something in the room had shifted, even if only slightly. The next few moments would shift the energy entirely. Under the bright studio lights, everything looked more polished on camera, but Karoline could feel the heat against her skin. Still, she kept her composure. She leaned in just a little, present, confident, not overly eager. Meanwhile, Jimmy looked relaxed, like he'd done this 1,000 times. His tie was loose, one leg crossed, his arm lazily hanging across the back of his chair. He looked at home. "So, Karoline," he said, casually flipping through his blue note cards, "you sure have a lot of opinions for someone who was still in high school when I won my first Emmy." The audience burst into laughter. It was a classic move. Poke. Fun at her age, act like the experienced veteran, and get everyone laughing early. Karoline stayed calm. "Well, Jimmy," she replied smoothly, "I was in high school when a lot of decisions were made that didn't help my generation. So I figured I should learn fast and get involved." The room quieted for a second, unsure how to react. Then a single person clapped. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the tension. Jimmy chuckled and shook his head like he was enjoying the banter, but his expression changed. His smile stayed, but his eyes looked sharper now. He leaned forward, tone shifting slightly. "But seriously," he asked, "what makes someone your age want to go into politics? Most people your age are busy making TikToks and sipping oat milk." The crowd laughed again, louder this time. Karoline gave a polite smile, but her voice was firmer now. "Because I don't want the people deciding my future to be the same. One's making fun of it on shows like this." The room went silent. The joke didn't land. Jimmy's smirk faded just a little. He glanced toward the booth, maybe hoping for some direction. He quickly shuffled his note cards, scanning for a new question that felt safer. But the tone had already changed. "You don't really think these kinds of shows affect public opinion, do you?" "We're just here to entertain," Jimmy said casually, brushing off the tension with a smile. Karoline tilted her head ever so slightly and replied with a calm tone. "Do you really believe comedy doesn't shape the way people think?" Jimmy gave a small shrug. "My job is to make people laugh." She leaned in a little, her voice firmer. "Then why does so much of your content seem to echo the talking points of just one political group? Why are the jokes always aimed in the same direction?" The audience gave another round of laughs, but this time they sounded more nervous, less sure of what was happening. Jimmy opened his mouth, maybe to deflect or joke again, but Karoline didn't give him the chance. "I, actually, brought something with me tonight," she said calmly. She reached under her chair and pulled out a neatly folded paper. It was marked with yellow highlights. "Back in October," she said, holding the paper up, "you did a piece on so-called anti-science Republicans. You quoted a specific phrase that almost exactly matched wording from a memo sent by a media group in Washington, D.C., a group funded by a political action committee." Jimmy straightened in his chair. The easy grin had vanished. Karoline placed the paper between them. "I have the memo here. I can read it out loud if you'd like." Jimmy's voice dropped slightly, no longer teasing. "Are you accusing me of copying material from a political organization?" "I'm saying someone on your team may have pulled from it. And if that happened, and you didn't know, maybe you should have." The mood in the room had shifted completely. No one was laughing. Now, Jimmy let out a forced laugh, his tone higher than before, trying to cut through the awkwardness. "Oh, wow. Look out. She's got a whole conspiracy board backstage, red strings and all?" A few soft chuckles came from the audience, but the energy wasn't the same. The air felt heavier. The tension was real. Karoline didn't flinch. "No board, just facts," she said simply. Then she placed the paper right on Jimmy's desk. The camera panned to him, but his charm had faded. He managed a tight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Do you really think this is the right place to do something like this?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Why not?" she responded smoothly. "You brought me here to talk about awareness. That's what I'm doing. and now your viewers are seeing it too." Jimmy didn't touch the document. He glanced at it like it was a live wire, something too risky to engage with. The studio no longer felt cheerful. It felt tense. Even the camera crew seemed to freeze. Karoline leaned back in her seat, not boastful, just steady. She hadn't come for drama. She came with intention. Jimmy reached for his water, finally. His hand shook ever so slightly. It was quick, but noticeable. "So, what exactly are you saying?" he asked, trying to joke again but sounding off. "That I'm part of some late-night secret society?" Karoline shook her head. "Not a secret. Group. Just a media circle that acts independent but follows the same script." Then she turned, not to Jimmy, not to the cameras, but to the people watching her from the audience. Real people under bright lights, seeing something very different from what they expected. Most people probably came here tonight expecting to have a good laugh. That's what late-night shows are for, right? But Karoline had a different plan. She looked out at the audience and asked, "How many of you knew that the segment Jimmy did back in October about anti-science panic was actually suggested by a media advisor working for the Red River Initiative?" That name didn't mean much to the crowd. It wasn't something people heard on the news. But it mattered. Karoline continued without flinching. "That group is funded by 3 major political donors," she said. "The same people who paid for the ad campaigns that this show pretended to mock." The room fell quiet. No one laughed, no gasps, just silence. The name wasn't famous, but the point was clear. Karoline wasn't guessing or speculating. Her folder had proof, dates, documents, email subject lines, even payment amounts. Jimmy moved his jaw slightly, like he was trying to decide what to say, but the words wouldn't come. He looked off camera toward the control booth and mumbled something under his breath, hoping for direction. Nothing happened. The cameras kept rolling. Karoline didn't need a green light. "I'm not accusing you of writing that segment," she said, turning back to Jimmy. "I'm saying someone in your team did. Someone got the messaging, polished it, and it showed up in your jokes." Jimmy raised his eyebrows and said sharply, "You think I write every single line on this show?" She replied, "No, but you still stand by them. You say them with your name on it." A ripple of murmuring moved through the crowd. People shifted, unsure how to feel. Even on a comedy set, this was different. It wasn't part of the act anymore. Jimmy leaned forward, now visibly irritated. "With all due respect, Karoline, this sounds like a stunt, like something people do just to make headlines. I don't take orders from strategists in Washington. I don't take orders from anyone." She didn't raise her voice. "Then why are you so defensive?" That hit hard. The question hung in the air without an answer. His jaw tightened again. "You're sitting here," he snapped, "coming on my platform and calling me a mouthpiece." "No," she said evenly. "I'm just pointing out that maybe you're not as independent as you think. Maybe the people pulling strings are closer than you realize." The room wasn't sure what to do. This wasn't the light-hearted interview they came for. It didn't feel like a performance. It felt real. It felt tense. That's when Jimmy slammed his hand down on the desk, not enough to damage anything but loud enough to stop everything. "That's it," he said sharply. He looked off stage and made a cutting motion across his neck. "End it." But Karoline wasn't finished. Sitting calmly, she asked one last thing. "If you really have nothing to cover up, why not let me finish?" The studio lights dipped slightly as the crew moved to transition to a commercial. But they were too slow. Several people in the audience had already pulled out their phones. Nobody cared about the no recording rule anymore. The moment was caught, and by morning, it would be everywhere. What spread wasn't just a short video. It was a spark. It became a full-blown conversation. And it wasn't one Jimmy Kimmel could shape with a joke or edit out in post. When the show returned from the break, Jimmy looked different. His expression was tight. No charm, no jokes, no friendly tone. He wore a strained smile and sat stiffly. Karoline was still in her seat, calm and focused, the paper still in her hands. The energy in the studio was gone. The room felt hollow. The applause signs were still flashing, but barely anyone clapped. Jimmy forced a laugh as the cameras zoomed in. Well, that got intense. Most of the crowd walked into the studio expecting nothing more than a few laughs, some light teasing, and the usual late-night banter. That's what these shows promised, comedy and entertainment. But Karoline had something else in mind. She wasn't there to play along. She turned toward the audience and asked a question that immediately changed the mood. Did any of you know that the segment Jimmy aired last October, the one making fun of so-called anti-science hysteria, was actually pushed by a media advisor working with an organization called the Red River Initiative? The audience didn't react. That name didn't ring a bell. It wasn't common knowledge. Still, it wasn't just a random detail. Karoline wasn't throwing around baseless claims. She knew what she was saying. She had files with her. Carefully organized documents, records of who sent what, when, and even how much money was involved. She continued calmly, "That group is backed by 3 wealthy donors. These are the same individuals who funded ad campaigns that your show later claimed to mock." The room went quiet. No one laughed or whispered. The atmosphere shifted, no longer light or funny. Jimmy moved in his seat, opening his mouth as if to speak, but words didn't come out. He glanced at the producers, quietly saying something. But the show continued. Karoline didn't wait for any instructions. She wasn't there to ask permission. She looked Jimmy in the eye and said, "I'm not blaming you for writing that segment, but someone on your team did. They took those words, made them sound better, and handed them to you to say." Jimmy sat up, surprised. "You think I write every word myself?" Karoline answered calmly, "No, but your name is attached to what you say. You take responsibility for it." The audience shifted in their seats. The easygoing mood had disappeared. Jimmy tried to regain control, leaning forward. "This feels like a setup, like someone trying to get attention. I don't follow anyone's script. I say what I believe." Karoline softly replied, "Then why are you getting so defensive?" Her words struck hard. Jimmy clenched his jaw. "You're accusing me of being controlled." "No," Karoline said. "I'm just suggesting that the influence might be closer than you realize." Now the room was fully engaged, unsure of what would happen next. This wasn't scripted. Jimmy slammed his hand on the desk, signaling the end of the conversation with a sharp motion across his neck. Karoline didn't back down. "If there's nothing to hide, why stop me?" The lights dimmed as the crew prepared for a break. But it was too late. The audience had already started recording. Soon, the video was all over social media, and once it was out, there was no turning back. When the show came back, Jimmy's usual easy smile was gone. His tone was forced, his body stiff. Karoline remained calm, holding up the papers with highlighted lines. The room felt heavy. Despite the applause signs, very few people clapped. Jimmy gave a fake laugh. Well, that took a turn. There was no flashy music, no quick cuts to commercials. The silence was thick. Karoline stood up, saying, "I think that's enough," and walked off the set alone, leaving the audience stunned. Jimmy sat still, unsure how to react, but the internet didn't wait. Within minutes, the video went viral. Hashtags like #TVMeltdown trended. At first, people dismissed it as drama, but as more footage circulated, viewers saw Karoline's calm responses and Jimmy's frustration. By morning, the video had millions of views, and Karoline was being discussed everywhere. Despite the growing interest, Karoline didn't speak publicly. She let the footage do the talking. She posted one simple line on social media: "Truth doesn't panic. Nothing else." That post spread quickly, gaining thousands of shares. Behind the scenes, Jimmy's team scrambled. No apology came from him, but the network released a vague statement. Viewers began rewatching past episodes, noticing patterns and questions about the real source of the jokes. The online conversation shifted from comedy to deeper concerns about who controls the messages we hear. In the end, Karoline's message wasn't about taking down Jimmy Kimmel or making a political statement. It was about questioning who decides, what we laugh at, and why we accept it without thinking. Her quiet strength started a conversation that reached beyond comedy, forcing people to think about the hidden influences shaping their entertainment.